Hey everyone, Nick Marzinski here at trappinglight.com, and I'm recording this on the first day of 2014. And usually it's the beginning of the year. A lot of people make a whole lot of resolutions that sometimes don't actually get kept. So people go to the gym for a few weeks to get fit, and then they stop, or they make plans to organize finances or clear out the clutter in their lives, and then it just simply, for one reason or another, doesn't happen. Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about bringing order to a different kind of clutter, specifically the clutter that's in Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. See, when you first get Photoshop or Elements and open it up, it's organized how Adobe thinks you might want it to be organized. However, for most people, that's not necessarily the best way that you can lay it out. And unlike a program like Lightroom, where the panels are pretty much locked in stone, Photoshop allows a surprising amount of customizability. So let's talk about organization in Photoshop and how or why you might want to change it. Now, generally when you start off using Photoshop, and I'm using Photoshop Creative Cloud, but any other full version of Photoshop, the CS versions are pretty much the same. It begins by giving you this Essentials workspace. Now, this workspace is up here and it's set to Essentials, okay? If you're using Photoshop Elements, it doesn't even give you that. You don't have the ability to customize or use workspaces. It just simply gives you the toolbar on the left and then a bunch of panels or palettes on the right that you might or might not use. And the problem with keeping it the way that it's originally set up as a default is that screen real estate is really kind of precious, and if you're cluttering your screen up with panels or palettes that you're not actually going to use, all that stuff ends up getting in the way and keeping you from the tools that you actually want to use, that you actually want to have at your fingertips. So let's clean up the clutter in this screen, and we're going to start right off here at the top, okay? And this is the right hand side of the screen where the palettes are. Okay, the first one right up here is this color tool palette. Now this is one that I don't use, and really I've never used, and so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to right click on it and then click close. Okay, and the palette is gone. Now if you've never done that before, this sort of thing might freak you out. You might be asking yourself, okay, well wait a second, that panel disappeared, but how do I get it back if I ever need it? And the answer to that is pretty simple. You just go up here to the window drop down and go right to color, and then you can see that it just comes right back up. Okay, I'm going to close it off again. Okay, now let's move on to the Swatches panel here. This one I actually use sometimes, so I'm going to keep it. However, when it's docked on the side like this, I don't like the way that all these colors line up. Okay, and this is the default swatch panel. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to drag it onto my work area and then just let it go. Okay, and this illustrates another property of Photoshop panels. They can either be docked onto the side like this adjustments and this layers panel are, or they can float right in the document, or right in your workspace rather. And in most cases you're going to want to have your panels docked, but in a few cases like the Swatches panel here, personally I prefer how it looks undocked. I like the way that the colors here all line up from light to dark and from red to through the rainbow to violet or magenta, and so that's how I like this panel to be laid out, and so I'm going to leave it this way. Okay, now I'm going to keep moving down. This adjustments panel I use periodically, so I'm going to keep it here. This styles panel that you have, that's right here, however, this one I never really use, and so I can right click on it and I can click close, or I can drag it out of the dock, and then there is a little X up on the upper right hand corner of the panel. If I click that, it closes it. Now again, even though I'm closing these panels, they still are right here. So there's still a styles panel right there. So I don't have to worry if I close something that it's completely gone forever. It's still there. It's just I'd have to go into the Windows submenu to find it. Okay, let's move right along here. The layers panel I work pretty well. That one I use all the time, and so this one definitely stays. The channels palette, I use that from time to time, especially when I'm doing black and white, so I'm going to just keep it. But paths here, this one never gets used. So I'm going to drag it out and then delete it. Okay. Now, I've got all the panels that I'm not using out of the way. And I've got lots of room here. You can see that my layers palette, my channels palette here, I've still got all this room below there that I can be using for other things. And so now that I've dragged all the useless panels out of the way, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go up to the Windows drop down here. I'm going to see if there's any panels that I'd like to have in my workspace. Okay, and just looking through it, the histogram, for example. Now this is one that if I'm editing a photograph, having a histogram that I can look at and I can see the dispersion of the darks on the left-hand side and the lights on the right-hand side, that could be pretty useful to have so that I know if I'm doing any clipping or anything like that. And so that's a panel that I think would actually work pretty well in my layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab it, click on it, and drag it. And then it just comes right off of that palette right there. Now you can see when I'm dragging it around, I'm getting these blue lines on my screen. Okay? Now if these lines appear around a panel like they appear on the adjustments panel and I let go of the mouse button so I stop dragging it, what happens is that it adds the panel that I was dragging to the existing one as a different tab. However, if I click it again and drag it, if I get the blue line above another panel, what it's going to do is it's going to put the one that I'm dragging on its own above the other panel where it had the blue line. And so this is a way for you to kind of configure your workspace and decide whether or not you want something like the histogram to be on its own, or if you want it as a tab with another one. In this case, I want the histogram by itself because I know that that I'm always going to be wanting to be able to see my dispersion of lights and darks within an image. The Navigator panel here is also one that can be helpful to have, and so I'm going to move this one and I'm going to put it below the adjustments panel. The nice thing about a Navigator panel, first of all, is it's got this slider so that you can zoom in and out very easily. The other nice thing about it is if I'm on my image and I'm working on it and I'm zoomed way in here, on the Navigator panel I can see exactly where I am, and then I can drag this around to where I want to be. So that's just a really useful tool to be able to have there that I can have access to when I need it. Okay, now that I've gotten those two on here, what else? Well, sometimes I do a lot of brush work, and so this brush and brush presets panel might be nice to have. I'll click on those. Now, what you can see is that they're pretty big panels. Okay, so if I drag it over here, it's just going to expand everything, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's what I want on my right-hand dock. Okay, that's just simply taking up too much space, number one. And number two, I don't necessarily use those panels that much. Okay, I use them from time to time if I'm working with weird brushes. However, for most of the time, if I'm just using a regular soft brush for masking, I don't really need them. But it's nice to be able to, if I need to be able to rotate my brush, to be able to do different shape dynamics or scattering or that sort of stuff. So instead of adding it right to the dock right here, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to click on this little double arrow. And what that does is it minimizes it. And let me just drag off the Navigator because this Navigator is really small. Really huge, excuse me. Layers. There you go. There's the Layers palette. Let's put the Navigator palette right back there. What it does when I click on this double arrow is that it adds it into this sort of side dock here, where instead of having the entire palette out and open, instead what I've got is I've got these icons for things that I can use. And so I've got the brushes right here, I've got my brush presets and brushes right here. Right here I've got my properties palette, which I don't need right now because I don't have an adjustment layer. I also have a history palette right here. But again, these are palettes that even though I'm going to want to use them periodically, I don't necessarily need to have them open all the time. In the case of the swatches, I can do the exact same thing. I can grab it and drag it right here. You'll see the blue line right under the brush and brush preset icon. I release it, and then I've got a swatch icon right here. So again, I like having the swatches around. I don't use them all that often. I can put them here on this icon dock, and then when I need them, I can just click on the icon. It brings out the palette, and then I can use it until I'm done, and then just click the double arrow. Okay, and the thing about panels is that Photoshop will actually allow me to make as many icon docks here and full docks as I want, and I can have them either on this side. I could drag the Swatches panel and I could put it over here as well, and so I can have multiple docks if I wanted to. I could even drag it down to the bottom and put it on the bottom as well. So there's really a lot of customizability in terms of where I can put all of that sort of stuff. Again, though, it's important to keep in mind why you're doing this. So it might be cool to have a bunch of panels stuffed all over the place and it looks really sophisticated. However, that can sometimes get in the way of the image that you're editing. And so on one hand, it's nice to be able to put panels everywhere that you want them to be. On another hand, you really want to keep it simple so that you've got the tools that you need, and really only the tools that you need. Now, at this point, now that I've rearranged my panel somewhat, I think I've got a pretty good layout going on here. Now, if you're working in Photoshop Elements, this is pretty much about as far as you can take it because you can't save workspaces. But if you keep it like this and then you close out of Elements, when you open it back up into the full editor, your layout is gonna stay this way. You won't go back to the original default of the program. If you're using full Photoshop, however, you have the ability to save different workspaces. And in CS6 and later, that's controlled by this drop-down that I talked about earlier here. In CS5, it's a row of names up at the top on the top bar here. But to save it, all I have to do is click on the drop-down and then go down to New Workspace. It's going to pop up a menu here, and then I just simply name it. So I'm going to call this Nick's Workspace. And I'm going to click Save. And that's pretty much it. Now you can see that it's added right in here. If I go back to Essentials, where it's going to reset Essentials. There we go. Go back to Essentials, which is where I started from. If I go back and click on Nick's Workspace, now all of a sudden it reconfigures it so that I've got my histogram, my adjustments, my navigator, my layers and channels, and then all of my icons right here. Okay? And that's pretty much it. So again, everything that you need is controlled, is available to you up on this Windows drop down here. That's kind of the important thing. Even this toolbar here, if I drag this toolbar off and accidentally delete it, it's, usually you look at that and go, oh, that's too bad. Now I don't have my tools anymore. You simply go back up to Windows, you click on Tools, and it's right back here. You just drag it right over to the side to get the blue line and then dock it. Okay? And so that's pretty much it. In the end, all of this stuff that I'm talking about with configuring your workspace is really all about simplifying your workflow. It's about putting the tools that you need right at your fingertips whenever you need them. Okay? And as you get familiar with workspaces, if you're using full Photoshop, it can also be helpful to have several different workspaces depending on what you're doing. So I have a retouching space where now I've got a lot of information. I've got my layers and channels here, but I also have a clone source, which allows me to set up different clone points so that I can do a lot of retouching very, very quickly with this clone source palette. There's also additional defaults that Adobe comes up with for things like typography, where now you have a character palette where you can vary things like the kerning and the space between your characters and the size and all that sort of stuff. So there's really a lot of flexibility here, a lot of ways that you can configure this program so that you can have it work for you instead of having all of these confusing panels that are cluttering up your space and that you really don't need. So that's it for now. I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them either on my blog at trappinglight.com or on my YouTube channel. Again, my name is Nick Marzinski, and I'm with trappinglight.com. Thanks, everybody.